I've got three sections here. The first is just where is AI driving creative today? So everybody gets to tell what they're doing and a quick answer on what's the most creative thing you've seen AI produce in the last 6 months or so. Konstantin, I'll let you go first.
Sure. So for me, some of the most interesting things have been with actually AI agents and swarms of agents, and how those could be. So I work in gaming. So for me, it's quite interesting to see how AI agents can be used in game testing and the kind of emerging behavior that we can utilize for test cases.
Cool. Armin.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back on campus. Just for context, I work at Flagship Pioneering, which is a company that creates companies. So a lot of the efforts that we have as it relates to imagination relate to coming up with ideas for new companies. So one of the things that we had created at Flagship some time ago, we call Sci-Fi Dreamer, which literally comes up with kind of sci-fi ideas for you to implement. Except the cool part is when you ask it actually to take the fiction out of the idea. So when you actually end up with something that you could potentially implement going forward. Again, not everything is 100%, meaning it doesn't come up with ideas that we are just going to go right out there and implement. Except I think it extends our imagination quite a bit. And we are going to pilot this summer with about 30 Flagship fellows to see how they do with it and how they do without it in terms of coming up with new ideas.
So you actually want it to hallucinate to begin with, basically.
Exactly.
Joanna.
Well, some of the work that we've been doing, I think I'm echoing. Did I get your attention? So some of the work that we're doing at Vibes AI, which is really kind of cool, we're decoding our cognitive health, so biomarkers in our voice. Is kind of the work that I've been doing. And some of the most creative things that we've been able to find is actually around fundamental frequency. And fundamental frequency, like if you get past the science of it and you go to the sci-fi part of it, one of the things that's so exciting about it is like we're starting to ask the question, are we vibing together? How do we create better social connections as opposed to this, the constant touch, but does the vibration or the frequency connect us? And what we're finding, at least I found early in the earliest prototype, which I happen to be wearing today, is that I actually vibe on the same frequency with my husband. And he said, well, why is that? And we're just desperately trying to answer the whys, but I found that many of my friends or my girlfriends, we vibe within a frequency of each other and have that same fundamental frequency. So we're finding interesting new ways to socially connect that way.
I want to come back on that. Russ.
Sure. Pleasure to be here. So I'm on both the art side and the technical side, looking at the future of visual technology, but also a lifelong visual artist. So I want to read a very short quote from you from a very unusual source to sort of set the stage. In 2002, Donald Rumsfeld, who at that time was Secretary of Defense, said, reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting, because as you know, there are known knowns, there are things we know, also things that are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we don't know, but there's also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know. And if one looks through history, these are the most interesting areas to study. And so I'm doing that with hallucination and how to basically use hallucination rather than as a negative, as a positive, and how to learn how to work with the AI systems to do positive hallucinations, to basically move out of the sort of box, this cultural box that we've created of ourselves by, sort of training the large language models. And I want to reference you something where you can go and look up, and it has an unusual name, and you'll find it on Google Scholar. It's called Alien Recombination, Exploring Concept Blends Beyond Human Cognitive Availability in Art. So it's to say that the AI knows things we don't know, and it's capable of showing pictures and creating things that we don't understand. This is an interesting area if you're a creative.
Thank you. Who would have thought we would have Donald Rumsfeld on the creativity panel? But both you guys talked a little bit about hallucinations as a positive. So I want to continue on that with the other thing I wanted to ask you, because so much of your work has been in XR and the ability to experience things through all these different interfaces. where does XR play in helping us to really realize the full value and the full creativity of AI?
Sure, yeah. Spent about 25 or more years in the XR world, that is extended reality, everything from virtual reality, augmented reality, heightened reality, et cetera. But as the last few years have unfolded, AI has become a player, particularly in my area in generative AI imaging. And it became pretty clear 3 or 4 years ago with diffusion modeling that something was going to drastically change. And what that was is our ability to create content. The biggest holdup with the whole XR excitement, interest, we know it works in many ways, is content creation. It's always been time-consuming, difficult, and hard to keep up in terms of if you're teaching or if you're doing research. So the idea is to use AI as a way to create content in near real time. So what we're really looking at is adding the ability to do generative AI imaging, but simply on the prompt saying equirectangular, do outpainting, give me a sky, give me a ground, do it stereoscopically. And you know what? It's actually a 3D world. So everything that I'm going to ask for, generate in 3D so that I can move around in the space. And oh, by the way, I want a penguin standing in front of me complaining about Donald Trump and his tariffs on me. And I want to hold a conversation with that penguin because he's an intelligent, non-playable or playable character, all in real time. And that's what's really exciting. Usually it would take months or years to create a scenario like that, but we're very close to being able to do it in near real time.
Armin, you want to build on that?
I was going to add, I think most of what Ross said, I'm sure many of you have worked in these other areas as well, but can also be applied to science, not the penguin and Donald Trump part maybe. But I think everything else you could almost kind of scientifically think of biology, asking can you create specific peptide that binds with something else? Can we create an RNA molecule? Can we create a tRNA molecule? So I think, in a way, I think the paradigm shift of being able real time to, prompting is not a good word, but to almost kind of ideate with a companion, that to generate something new, I think goes, and we can take beyond images that I think we will love to look and see, to domains that also would be somewhat image-based, in a way, because you can look at a protein and say, is it a three-dimensional image, actually, if I can convert it to a sequence.
The paper I quoted to you is from the Planck Institute, and it is based on work by a guy named Evans at the University of Chicago, who was basically looking at group thinking and how you can break the boundaries of what the group knows, how you can create an algorithm or a way to break the wall, get outside of it, and see the whole thing holistically. And that covers science, art, humanities. It's a general notion of how to look outside the box.
Konstantina.
Yeah, well, this makes me think, so the kind of work that we do at August Interactive is that we are trying to create dynamic systems that respond to players. So we map cognitions, work with cognitive science, game design, and then AI-driven analytics to help map and then improve maybe or change decision-making patterns in players. But this is also a very creative endeavor of how to collaborate with consumers of entertainment and how to meet them where they are and understand them better and then to help them self-realize in some way.
But I want to come back to vibes because the fact that you're wearing the AI in your ear.
Yeah.
So much of this discussion's been about text or visual, but you've really focused on music and sound. So.
Well, I have focused on sound for probably the vast majority of my life. I'm actually severely dyslexic. And so I learned at a very early age that I was an auditory learner. So I've spent the better half of my career hacking text interfaces. And I think we're still, in that space right now in AI and how we engage with it is still very much text-driven. But the reality is it's not very creative. It's not very human. It's actually harkens back to the 1950s terminal. And I think one of the things that's super exciting about what we're doing in Vibes is actually exploring what it means to break open audio in a new way and look at music as not just entertainment, but actually encoding that AI hasn't quite explored yet. When we think about large language models, we certainly have text banks, but we haven't even scratched the surface on sound and decoding our voices. And so much of what we think about in ancestral intelligence, if I thought about, AIs, we have the artificial kind and we have the ancestral kind, and bringing these things together is really about breaking open an abundant imagination for creators. And if we can use our voices to be able to do that, I think that we actually stand a chance to actually creating completely new experiences, sensual experiences, where we are blending. When we talk about multisensory, we often think about it in like these hives. It's your sound, it's visual, it's touch, it's taste. But in reality, I think where we have the opportunity to truly play and be use our abundant imagination is to augment our authentic intelligence by kind of crossing those sensory experiences and blending them in a way that becomes indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think it's the audio in XR, the same situation, was very underdeveloped, even when spatial audio became available. Again, it was a cost, it was an effort, it was a specialization. Now we're seeing that this is just being folded in as something. When I used to teach film, you would say that sound is more than half the picture and 10% of the budget. And we basically need to balance that budget if we're going to do fully immersive, intelligent experiences.
Well, and I think one of the things, just jumping on top of that, is from sound is half the picture, but it also, if we think about it, I think our perspective is that music is medicine, and has been forever. And it really has the ability to change our autonomic nervous system. And when we think about our fight-flight responses, sound plays such an enormous role in that. And so much, I think, of the exploration of creativity and what we can do with AI helps us to blend the everyday health with the ability to create and play, which is really important when we think about brain health.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you both started with teaching and learning and education, because I think the last part of the conversation we should have is how do humans and machines together co-create. I want to start with Plucked, because you're working on a great game, which I think is really helping people learn how to learn. So maybe explain a little bit about what Plucked is doing and how Plucked is going to help people work better with AI.
Yeah, and I think the through line for all of us in this moment of change is like thinking about what is entertainment, what is like how do people create, and like what is entertaining to people. And so at Plugged, the game that we are developing, it isn't just, so it is entertainment first. So we are trying to create something. We have great experts in game design in some of the the leading companies with a lot of experience. But what we are trying to do is create games that are not only for entertainment, but are also diagnostic and development tools. So we work with players to map cognitive processes to understand their decision-making patterns, and then also to provide personalized feedback. All of this is wrapped in games, in entertainment, so you do not, you're just enjoying yourself and playing and learning. And the whole idea is that you can think of applications not only in, education, in training, in mental health care, as you were mentioning, but entertainment first. Have fun that is also enriching to you.
Awesome. Armin, you're trying to, one of your companies is trying to help companies who develop consumer products or fashion or help them develop better products using AI. But that's a very different process than what they all went to business school to learn and what they've been doing for decades to be successful. So how can these institutions learn new ways of working?
Yeah. Thanks, David. Maybe a couple of words about the company that you mentioned.
I didn't know it was stealth, so.
Yeah, I'll just.
But John says you're supposed to out stealth up here anyway.
Quite a bit about it, so I'll maybe share a bit with the audience as well. It's something we have been working on kind of last 2 years on. And I'm sure, I think agentic is a word that now kind of probably is the buzzword probably every minute, I think on every floor, I think it's a word that's being used. But about 2 years ago, we asked ourselves how we could try to mimic what nature does, which is kind of, nature is very good at creating new ideas, new things. And the way it does, it creates variability, creates optionality, and then applies selective pressure. That's how nature operates. And we thought at the time that with potentially AI agents, you could try to mimic the process. So imagine having, imagine having tens of or hundreds of thousands of AI agents that could actually kind of think divergently, create a whole bunch of optionality, but then same agents or different agents could apply selective pressure in actually trying to then figure out which are the surviving ones of these ideas. So that's what we have worked on, that's what we've implemented, and probably in a month, I think we can share the company and what it does with everyone else. But to your actual question, David, in terms of how do you, maybe at a level of an organization, try to adopt a new way of thinking, something that kind of our CEO has been proponent of is this kind of idea of, we call polyintelligence. And the idea is that there is not just one type of intelligence, which is generally we think about human intelligence as being kind of the only type of intelligence, except if you even look at the definition of intelligence, intelligence means ability to acquire knowledge and skills and apply them. I mean, by that definition, AI agents and ML models are pretty intelligent. Most of them, I would argue, that are actually more intelligent than we are in many different domains. But then we can actually go even further and say that nature is extremely intelligent by the same definition, except the timescales are very different. Nature had 4 billion years to kind of experiment with. But if we can say that intelligence consists of nature's intelligence, humans' intelligence, machines' intelligence, then can we leverage the power of all three of them to come up with new ideas, new concepts, and to drive them forward? And in a way, that's what we are trying to do. For machine intelligence, we have a separate kind of center of excellence we call pioneering intelligence, that all it does is develops capabilities in machine intelligence. Human intelligence, hopefully we hire some of the greatest people, also mostly from here as well, to help drive human intelligence. But then also you try to rely on nature's intelligence, what nature has learned and has done that maybe we have ignored over time, and how we can combine it with the rest of the intelligences.
And those at Flagship who believe in your companies do that well, can old dogs learn new tricks? Do you think that big companies can learn to use polyintelligence, or are they going to just be disrupted?
I think many of them are learning. I think for a lot of large companies as well, I mean, there was, I think, a study conducted by Harvard, I think it's called DQ, the Digital Data Design Institute, with Procter & Gamble, which is probably as large as,
yep.
I think it comes from
They're big.
as large as they become, and where they used AI and basically machine learning to augment
yep.
how they do work. And actually they showed that it works pretty well. So a lot of the time, I think you need an impetus, and it's somewhat sad to say, but I think sometimes the economic downturn can be a pretty good impetus to say what else we can adopt and what else we can do. So who knows, maybe in the next 2 years we'll see a lot more adoption of these tools in large companies as well.
There needs to be, I think.
Yeah.
And that's the enterprise. Joanne, I want to do the same thing with you on individuals. I have to say, I've been fortunate to work with Joanna a long time ago at Digitas, where it sounds obvious now, but in 2006, had to teach people to trust that they could get their credit card statement online.
That's right.
The first American Express sites. IBM, you worked with a lot of folks around Watson in the early days of AI, yep. Then Alexa, then Uber, now Vibe. Nobody relates to humans in the heart the way you do, I think. And so what is it that will build the trust with humans to take full advantage of this technology?
I think there's a couple of things. It's also, I think you talked about it being that AI is more intelligent than human. I'd argue that it's not. I'd argue with text alone isn't a representative of the human experience completely. I think we have portions of it. And there's so much intelligence in the world that has nothing to do with text. And that we as humans have both a responsibility to acknowledge and use in a way where perhaps we're inventing new technologies where it gets better and it helps augment us. And I think it's really understanding. I think truly it is about almost being a humanist in a room where sometimes my answer is put a chip in everything, by the way. But it's taking a moment of pause and asking, is this truly human? Have we reached human intelligence? And and thinking about how intelligent we are. And it's just a really good example is my ears are antennas, so are yours, by the way, and they're unique to you. And a part of understanding that is that they are both responsible, the intelligence they carry and that yours carry, is they carry an intelligence that is actually helps me stay upright and balanced. So think about that. I haven't seen AI do that really well yet. If we think a little bit about how some of us make different connections and learn differently, what's interesting is that most of the math that is in the AI today doesn't account for the math that would be replicable of somebody who has dyslexia. And so we're still on the cusp of actually creating different types of intelligence. And I think that when we truly understand ourselves as human beings and how incredible we are as human beings, then you can then say, here's where we can take an interface. If you remember, this was an interface.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, if you can see my bracelet, this is like Ada Lovelace's name in kind of an original text interface. And I think that what we have to do is we want to see the adoption curve move from the, those of us who are kind of the technorati,
Yep.
the early adopters to the mass adoption. What I learned at Alexa was actually making it more and more human. And why smart speakers became ubiquitous in people's homes was because it was something you could speak to. And it was unassuming. And I think that as we enter, we go for, because we're just scratching the surface on voice as we get into brain and brain interfaces, which is not too far off. Where we start to see that adoption curve really become far more human is when we acknowledge what you talked about at the very beginning of this, which is we don't know what we don't know about ourselves. And so to suppose that we do and say that this is the end, that we've got human intelligence mastered, is actually really quite arrogant. And we have an opportunity to humble ourselves just a little bit and start to apply that humbleness in our innovations and do so in a way that brings magic and joy to people's lives. And I think when you move through with that intention, but you truly understand how we work as humans, and that there were lots of humans that came before us, and so much of that intelligence has been lost. We as humans need to actually sit down and codify some of that ancestral intelligence and go, we've actually got a long way to go when it comes to discovering how it is that we will innovate past where we are today, which is kind of exciting, to where we will be tomorrow, and hopefully we'll solve some of those problems. Because ultimately, where does this go? We're creators, and if we can apply these to the real problems that we have today in the world, that's when people will embrace it. When they see it's this is addressing a really serious problem. For me, voice addressed a problem not being able to read at a young age, but it also flipped that on its head during COVID. The problem I was trying to solve in the interface of sound was actually addressing my dad's dementia. And the more that I dug and understood was whoa, wait a minute, there's 500 biomarkers in our cognitive conditions, and we could make preventable cognitive decline obsolete. That's a problem we're solving and applying the creativity to. And I think all of us that don't want cognitive decline and want a better quality of life as we're living longer, that's when we're going to see mass adoption and creativity with
You
this.
just need to move fast enough for some of us. We're getting there. But which is why I want to have Russ build on this, because you're on campus, you teach, you deal with a lot of generations. Pardon me, the ancestral question is, how much do we need to let the next generation lead? Because they're AI native versus try to get everybody up to speed. So what's your view on where different generations are in AI fluency?
Yeah, I think it's very important is to understand who your audience is, either you're talking to or teaching or working with. And there is a very distinct difference when you come down the line from the boomers to Gen X to millennial to Gen Z, Gen Alpha. These are different groups. They think differently, they absorb information differently, they're stimulated in different ways as to what excites them and gets them motivated. And there's no one size fits all. And right now, I think there's a big danger in the AI world, particularly when you productize AI, to go for the largest number of customers and sort of leave the margins alone because there's no money there. But in fact, you're right. I think the students that I have most responsive to are basically the Gen X and soon to be Gen Alpha, that they basically look at you and say, why didn't you do this sooner? Why did you do it in a way that doesn't make any sense to me? I think in a sort of multiplex way. I multitask. I take input in various ways. You in my education have not been paying attention to that. You've been preaching to me as if I was sitting in a Greek or a Roman lyceum being lectured to. Yep. This doesn't work for me. Change it. And so I think there is a pressure from the bottom up to say we are inherently better attuned to technology. We may not have the experience level that you do, but in our world, that doesn't matter to us. We're creating our own experience history. We're creating what we want to do. And these tools are really good for that. So you introduce somebody to AI at the start of a, say, 72-minute class. Within 3 or 4 minutes, they're using it in the class while you're still talking to them. Halfway through the class, they've already created something, solved the problem, and then they'll ask you, what next? Before you've even finished what you were describing. So they're taking it in real time, they're using it in real time, and we say to them, and we see the papers when they come back, and you can see sort of before and after. First paragraph is written by them, second paragraph is written by GPT, third paragraph is written by them, fourth, et cetera. And you say to them, well, I can tell, and they say, yeah, but why does it matter? Basically, I'm learning, and this is helping me speed up the learning. I'm not worrying about, is my English correct? Is my structure correct? I'm just basically making sure that I cover all this territory as quickly as possible and that I do something with it in the end. So yeah, I think it's very important to realize that this generation, what we hand them is not necessarily what we think we're handing them. This is the unknown part. We don't know what they're going to do with this, whether it's millennial or Gen Z or Gen Alpha. They're going to do really interesting things. And that's why I'm interested in how we can work with the AI in its non-traditional role, this hallucination world, where it's thinking outside the box like they're thinking outside the box. And when I explain to them about thinking outside the box, they go, well, yeah, that's a positive. How do I make my AI hallucinate for me? I like this idea. So it's a very important understanding, I think, right now. In a room full of people that are often 40, 56 years old, there probably aren't a lot of teenagers in the room. There should be, because they're the ones that are going to live with our results.
They are out in the hall launching great new businesses. So
David, I just want to add on
Please.
to that for just a second, because I think what you said something, and I want to capture so profound. But why do we think that the essay is the measure of intelligence?
Yeah.
Why do we think that? Like, might we reinvent, and to that point, for this generation, and enable them to reinvent what education is and how we measure their mastery of a particular topic? I mean, I think one of the things that we think about, during the Industrial Revolution, that we essentially industrialized education by thinking everything needed to be written and everything needed to be codified into text. And so I think it begs the question, are we using the right mechanisms to now measure intelligence, human intelligence and mastery, and their creativity about what they will do with it?
I think the answer is we're not.
Right.
And we need to think about it more clearly and find ways, either through gamification, through socialization, social media, through them being creators and influencers. This is a goal for them to solve problems in their own life.
Awesome.
Go with it, right?
Constantine, last word.
Yeah, just to mention, so when hearing you guys speak, you were trying to decide, almost like a hierarchy of intelligence, like nature, machines, humans. I think it doesn't really matter. The point is collaboration, being inspired by all of these different domains. I love what you said about nature, and actually there's evidence that evolution is speeding up. It's amazing. the point is just to collaborate, to put all of these things together. And like you were saying about unknowns unknown and like that framework, well, the point is like to make new things, get as most information as possible and make new things. Whether it's like where you're based on nature, machines, humans, it's okay, you know, as long as like it's like you said, an utility, but utility for marginal cases, utility for the general public, you know, it doesn't
Awesome.
matter. It could be anything.
Thank you all. In closing, I would say two things. One, hallucinations are a good thing, not a bad thing. You don't create without them. So heard that from everyone. And number two, if John Werner ever says you have to do a panel, do what I did. Say, I want the creative one, because the work is easy. Everybody just builds on each other. They threw the agenda completely out the window and had a great chat. I appreciate the conversation very much.
You.